The Galactic Council chamber was a monument to authority, its vast domed ceiling etched with the history of species that had come before. 100 delegates sat in their appointed seats, representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. The air thrummed with a quiet arrogance, an assumption of control that had gone unquestioned for millennia. At the center of the chamber stood the human delegation. They were a small party, only 5 in number, a stark contrast to the dozens who had assembled to deliver the council's decree. Ambassador Nolan Carter stood at their head, his expression unreadable as he faced the council speaker. The speaker was an Urathan, a species known for their towering reptilian forms and a history of ruthless efficiency. His name was Varric, though such formalities were meaningless in this moment. He did not see Carter as an equal, nor humanity as anything but another species to be brought under the council's dominion. His voice, smooth and practiced, carried easily through the vast chamber. "Let it be known," Varric announced, "that the species designated as humanity has been deemed fit for integration into the Galactic Council. In accordance with the Grand Charter, they are hereby required to pay tribute, a demonstration of their loyalty and gratitude for the privilege of existing under our governance." The words were spoken without malice, without expectation of resistance. This was the way of things. Every species before humanity had accepted their place, offered their tribute, and bowed to the authority of the council. Some had resisted in the past, but all had learned the same lesson. No one defied the council and survived. Silence settled over the chamber as the assembled delegates turned their attention to Carter, waiting for his response. The humans did not whisper among themselves, did not exchange uncertain glances. There was no fear in their posture, no hesitance in their stance. Only quiet certainty. Carter stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm. He let the silence stretch a moment longer, long enough for the weight of expectation to press down upon them all. Then he spoke. It was not shouted, it was not accompanied by any grand gesture, it was a simple, unyielding statement, delivered with the finality of a sealed fate. The chamber did not erupt in immediate outrage, as one might expect. Instead, there was a pause, a stunned, disbelieving quiet that rippled through the gathered species like an aftershock. It was as though the very structure of the council's authority had been struck by a blow it had never conceived of taking. Varric's golden eyes narrowed, his forked tongue flickering, as though tasting the air for deception. "Clarify your response, human. You seem to misunderstand. This is not a request. It is a decree." Carter did not move. And humanity's answer remains the same, no. A murmur began among the delegates, some clicking mandibles, others flashing bioluminescent signals of disbelief. The Zalari representative, a being of crystalline structure, emitted a sharp frequency that indicated confusion. The Rolan diplomat, whose people had once surrendered entire fleets to the council without question, leaned forward in stunned fascination. Varric's voice dropped to something lower, something edged with quiet menace. "You do realize the consequences of defying this order?" Carter tilted his head slightly, considering the words, then offered the faintest of smiles. "I think the real question, Speaker," he said, voice even, unshaken, "is whether you realize the consequences of demanding tribute from humanity." The chamber was no longer silent. The murmurs of disbelief had grown into a low, rolling wave of voices. Some incredulous, some concerned, and others barely restrained in their anger. The assembled delegates had witnessed countless species take their place under the council's rule, yet never had a civilization dared to refuse so blatantly. Varric's posture stiffened, his golden eyes locked onto Carter. The Urathan had presided over many such ceremonies, watched as rulers of powerful empires bent the knee, seen once proud warlords lower their heads in submission. There had been resistance before, of course, but it had always crumbled under the weight of the Council's might. The sheer audacity of humanity's response was almost incomprehensible. "Perhaps there is a misunderstanding," Barak said, his voice slow, deliberate. "Tribute is not merely a tradition. It is the foundation upon which peace is built. Every species has given their due, their offering in recognition of the order we have created. You will not be the first to defy this law, but I assure you, human, you will not be the last to suffer for it." Carter did not flinch. His expression remained unchanged, calm but firm, a quiet confidence radiating from him like an unshakable foundation. His fellow delegates stood behind him, their silence speaking volumes. There was no fear in their eyes, no nervous shifting, no whispered conversations. They had come prepared. "You speak of peace," Carter said finally, his voice cutting through the layered conversations in the room. "But what you demand is submission. There is no honor in tribute, no respect in forced obedience. We do not recognize the authority of the Council to dictate our sovereignty. So again, our answer remains no." A ripple of reaction passed through the delegates, some flashing signals of alarm, others leaning toward one another in hushed discussion. The Tovari representative, a being whose species had once surrendered entire generations to Council labor forces, clicked his mandibles in open disbelief. The Zelari noble emitted another sharp whistle, its tone shifting in a way that suggested either admiration or utter incredulity. Varric's grip tightened on the railing before him, his clawed fingers pressing against the smooth metal. "You do not seem to grasp the gravity of your situation," he said, his voice laced with warning. "Every species before you has recognized the wisdom of compliance. Even those who resisted learned, in time, the futility of defiance. You stand alone, human. There will be consequences." Carter exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You assume we are afraid of consequences," he said. "That we will cower, as others have. That we will break, as others did." He took a single step forward, locking eyes with Varric. "But what you fail to understand, Speaker, is that humanity has never bowed to those who demand our servitude, and we never will." The silence that followed was different now. Thicker, heavier. It was no longer the stunned pause of disbelief, but the quiet calculation of power shifting in the room. The Council had expected submission. Instead, they had been given an answer they had never prepared for. No. The Council's response was swift. Within hours of humanity's defiance, diplomatic channels flooded with warnings, ultimatums, and veiled threats. Official communiques from dozens of member species demanded reconsideration, urging the humans to rethink their reckless course before it was too late. But no amount of pressure changed their answer. The Council's next move was predictable. Sanctions were declared, trade embargoes enacted, human colonies were cut off from the interstellar markets they had just begun to access. Council-controlled banking systems froze all human assets, and suppliers who had eagerly sought trade with Earth were now warned that any continued dealings would be seen as an act of complicity. It was a textbook maneuver, one that had broken countless civilizations before. Cut off their resources, isolate them, and watch as desperation forced them to crawl back, begging for the mercy they once spat upon. Except humanity did not beg. Reports began to filter in, first as rumors, then as undeniable facts. The expected economic collapse did not happen. The embargoes, intended to strangle humanity's access to vital resources, instead revealed something the Council had failed to anticipate. Humanity had prepared for this. Unlike the other species that had come before them, humanity was not dependent on the Council's trade networks. They had spent years building redundancy into their supply chains, establishing alternative trade routes with rogue factions and non-Council-aligned systems. They had developed their own self-sustaining industries, mining their own resources, refining their own materials. More than that, humanity was used to hardship. Their history was one of survival against impossible odds, economic turmoil, scarcity, embargoes. None of these were new challenges to them. They adapted, they innovated, and they thrived. The first real shock came when the Council tried to exert military pressure. A small fleet was dispatched, not an outright act of war, of course, but a reminder of the consequences of defiance. The fleet moved toward a human outpost along the border of Council space, a routine show of force meant to intimidate. Standard procedure dictated that the humans would either surrender the station or flee. They did neither. Instead, the moment the Council fleet crossed into human-claimed space, they were met with immediate resistance. The human defenders did not hesitate, did not issue warnings, did not engage in the drawn-out negotiations that so many others had before them. They simply opened fire. The battle lasted 13 minutes. The Council fleet never stood a chance. Their ships, designed for intimidation rather than war, were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outclassed in ways no one had expected. Humanity's weapons were not based on Council designs. Their tactics were unpredictable. Their technology, which had been dismissed as primitive, was optimized for efficiency rather than ceremony. The surviving Council ships fled, limping back to deliver the first true military defeat the Council had suffered in centuries. And still, humanity's answer had not changed. No, the news of the Council's defeat spread faster than light. What had been unthinkable only days before had now become undeniable reality. Humanity had stood against the might of the Council, and not only survived, but won. The reaction across the galaxy was immediate and chaotic. Some species recoiled in horror, unable to comprehend that a civilization as young as humanity had struck a blow against the oldest and most dominant force in known space. Others, particularly those who had suffered under the Council's rule, watched with growing fascination. If the humans could resist, if they could continue to defy the Council, what did that mean for everyone else? Within the Council itself, panic took root beneath the layers of arrogance. The attack on the human outpost had not been a true invasion, merely a warning strike, but it had exposed something deeply unsettling. The humans had not been intimidated. They had not hesitated. They had not crumbled under the weight of the Council's power as so many before them had. And that meant the Council's greatest weapon, fear, had failed. Arik sat in the high chambers, his claws drumming slowly against the polished stone of the Council dais. The assembled delegates spoke in hurried, urgent voices, demanding answers, demanding action. The humans had humiliated them. Their defiance had not only held, but had cost the Council ships, soldiers, reputation. "This cannot stand," a Zellery admiral hissed, her crystalline form flickering with pulses of anger. "They have defied us openly. They must be crushed." "They will be," Varik said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "We will bring overwhelming force. We will wipe their fleets from existence. This was a mistake we will not repeat." But even as he said it, doubts festered beneath his words. The humans had not just fought back. They had fought smart. Their technology, while seemingly primitive, had been devastatingly effective. Their ships did not follow the elegant, ceremonial designs of Council warships. They were built for war, for efficiency, for victory. Their tactics had been unpredictable, their coordination flawless. And worst of all, they had not fought like a desperate people resisting inevitable defeat. They had fought like a species that expected to win. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. While the Council deliberated their next move, humanity remained silent. They issued no threats, no demands, no boasts. They simply continued as they had before, indifferent to the storm raging around them. They did not offer peace, but neither did they declare war. They simply went about their business, preparing for the next strike as if it were inevitable. Because it was inevitable, the council could not allow this defiance to stand. Their rule had been absolute for millennia, their dominance unquestioned. If humanity's rebellion was not crushed, then it would become something far worse than a military threat. It would become an idea. And ideas were the one thing even the council could not kill. The war did not begin with a declaration. There was no grand pronouncement, no ceremonial announcement of hostilities. The council did not ask for surrender, and humanity did not offer terms. There was only the quiet inevitability of conflict, the unspoken understanding that neither side would yield. The council believed in overwhelming force. Their strategy was built on centuries of subjugation, on the knowledge that any species that resisted would eventually buckle under the weight of superior numbers, technology, and experience. Their fleet stretched across the stars, their armories filled with weapons that had humbled civilizations far older than humanity. They expected this war to be a demonstration, a reminder to the galaxy of what happened to those who defied them. They did not expect humanity. The first engagements were meant to be overwhelming. Entire council battle groups were dispatched to human-controlled sectors, tasked with reducing their fleets to scrap and their worlds to smoldering ruin. On paper, the battles should have been decisive, swift, and absolute. But from the very first skirmish, it became clear that nothing would go as planned. Human ships moved in ways council tacticians could not predict. Their vessels were not the elegant, regimented formations of traditional fleet warfare. They fought asymmetrically, exploiting weaknesses no other species had dared to test. They did not engage in drawn-out battles of attrition. They struck hard, fast, and then vanished before counterattacks could land. And worst of all, they adapted. For every battle the council fought, humanity learned. For every advantage the council pressed, humanity found a counter. Their engineers modified ships mid-conflict. Their commanders changed tactics in real time. Their soldiers fought with a level of ingenuity and unpredictability that left even the most seasoned council generals reeling. The war should have been over in months. Instead, it dragged on. Council fleets were forced into battles they could not win, their supply lines cut, their movements anticipated before they could even issue orders. Entire sectors fell to precision strikes, not through brute force, but through careful, calculated destruction of key infrastructure. Communications arrays, fuel depots, logistics hubs. Humanity did not fight for glory. They fought to win. And they were winning. The Council's greatest weakness had never been its firepower or its numbers. It had been its arrogance. It had never faced an enemy like this before. Every species before humanity had fought by the Council's rules. Even those who had resisted had done so in ways that were predictable, impossible by the Council's definition. Now, humanity did not play by those rules. And as the Council's fleets burned, as their strongholds fell one by one, as entire member species began to question whether they too could defy the order they had feared for so long, one terrifying truth became clear. Exercise isn't about escaping fear or boiling. When we are fearful, we try harder. The Council had not simply started a war. They had provoked a species that did not lose. The war had reached a tipping point. For the first time in its long and storied history, the Galactic Council found itself on the defensive. Humanity, the upstart species they had expected to crush in a matter of weeks, had turned their war machine against them with ruthless efficiency. The once mighty fleets of the Council were now scattered, fractured by defeats that should have been impossible. Worlds that had once sworn allegiance to the Council watched with growing disbelief. Some hesitated, unsure whether to remain loyal to a power that was no longer invincible. Others, those who had long suffered under the Council's rule, saw an opportunity. a chance to break free. Revolts began to simmer across the outer colonies, uprisings that the Council had neither the manpower nor the morale to suppress. The Council's high chamber, once a place of unwavering confidence, was now filled with frantic voices. The delegates who had once spoken with smug certainty now argued in desperation, grasping for a solution that continued to elude them. "We cannot allow this to continue," the Zeldari Admiral snapped, her crystalline body vibrating with barely contained fury. "If we do not act now, there will be nothing left of the Council to defend." "We have acted," a Ruan strategist countered, his fur bristling with agitation. "We sent fleets, we imposed sanctions, we tightened our grip, and none of it has worked. Every move we make, they anticipate. Every strike we launch, they counter. Tell me, what more can we do?" Barak sat in silence, listening to the chaos around him. The proud Urathan leader, once the architect of the Council's dominance, now felt the weight of inevitable collapse pressing down upon him. He had underestimated the humans. They all had. This was not simply a war of weapons. It was a war of ideas. The Council's rule had endured for millennia because it had seemed absolute. It had not been questioned because questioning it had always led to destruction. Their strength had been built upon the certainty that no species could stand against them. And yet, humanity had done just that. They had not only defied the Council's authority, they had proven it could be defied. Every victory they won sent ripples across the galaxy, unraveling the foundations of power the Council had taken for granted. "This war cannot be won," a voice finally said. The chamber fell silent. Barak exhaled slowly, his golden eyes scanning the room. He had not spoken the words, but he did not need to. They all felt it. The truth, undeniable and inescapable. "We should never have demanded tribute from them," Barak admitted at last. "We mistook them for something they were not. We assumed they would behave like the others. We believed they would submit." He shook his head, his claws tightening into fists. "But humanity does not submit." The Council had never known fear. Now it was all they had left. The war did not end with a final, climactic battle. There was no grand surrender, no ceremonial signing of peace treaties. The Council did not offer terms, and humanity did not demand them. Instead, the war simply stopped. Council fleets, battered and broken, withdrew from human-controlled space, unable to sustain further losses. Their supply lines had collapsed. Their once mighty war machine was now a fragmented shadow of its former self, held together only by desperation. The Council's once unquestioned authority had crumbled, not beneath the weight of humanity's weapons, but beneath the weight of their defiance. The message humanity had sent was clear. We will not bow. And now the rest of the galaxy had heard it. Revolts spread like wildfire. Species that had spent generations under the Council's control began to rise, emboldened by humanity's victory. The illusion of the Council's invincibility was gone, and without it, their empire began to rot from within. Barak stood in the great chamber, staring at the empty seats of the delegates who had abandoned the Council, their governments too unstable to waste time here. Those who remained spoke in hushed, uncertain voices, their once proud arrogance replaced with the quiet dread of a fading power. "This is the end," a voice said beside him. He turned to see the Zalari Admiral, her crystalline form dimmed, no longer radiating the light of confidence. She did not look at him, only at the vast chamber around them. "Not today, perhaps, not tomorrow, but we both know it. The Council will never be what it was." Barak said nothing. He had known it for some time. Humanity had not simply defeated them, they had proven that the Council could be defied, and once that proof existed, there was no undoing it. The doors to the chamber opened, and every delegate turned to see them enter. A human delegation. Ambassador Carter walked with the same calm, unshaken confidence he had displayed the day this had all begun. Behind him were the same human representatives, unchanged, untouched by the fear that now gripped the chamber. He stopped before the council and let the silence settle. Varric exhaled slowly. "You have won," he admitted, the words bitter in his mouth. "What will you do now?" Carter regarded him with something almost like pity. "We didn't fight this war to conquer you," he said. "We didn't fight it to replace you." He took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "We fought because you demanded that we kneel, and we do not kneel." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Humanity did not ask for a seat on the council. They did not demand reparations or territory. They simply turned and left, walking away from the ruins of an empire that had once thought itself untouchable. Because they had never wanted to rule. They had only wanted to be free.